In this video, we're going to take a look at one of the most game-changing bike components I've reviewed in a while, the Growtac control levers. One of the more annoying things about the bike industry is the constant upgrade cycle of everything. Every time a new cog is added, you have to upgrade the shifters. This leads not only to a lot of added expense to the end user, but waste in forced obsolescence, but also a myriad of compatibility problems. There are workarounds. I'm a big fan of friction shifters like bar ends, hence we work with Mary Sales to get the Uno bar end made. It can also be mounted on brake levers such as this. I love them. They have their charm, but for some they may seem too antiquated or hipster to be taken seriously. So in today's Peak Mechanical, we're going to take a deep dive into the Growtac control levers, probably the most interesting and sophisticated friction shifter out there on the market. Currently, they're Japan only, but worldwide release will be relatively soon. Will it finally bring friction to the current generation of roadies? Maybe. I'll give you my impressions, some of the quirks in installation, and the pros and cons thus far. You know who else is into durability and compatibility is today's sponsor, Old Man Mountain. They've been around for 25 years, making some of the most functional, durable, and compatible bike racks out there on the market. And you know, all those words are my love language. You can run them on bikes with eyelets or on through axles or even quick release. They've been doing the axle mounted rack game long before anyone else. They're also innovating with cool products like their new pizza rack. It's a platform rack that integrates with their tactical basket. You can use it as a bag support for Paradise bags or just bungee things to the top of it. New this year is that they've also added water bottle mounts to the uprights, and in total it supports 35 pounds, which is just bananas. I'm a huge advocate for functionality and compatibility, and Old Man Mountain products ticks all those boxes. And because of that, I'm super stoked that they're sponsoring a couple episodes of Peak Mechanical. If you're not familiar with Growtac, they are a small Japanese component company. They really shook things up a couple years ago with their equal cable actuated disc brake. Those provided amazing stopping power in such a tiny package and also anodized colors. And I think they're poised to do the same with shifters in these control levers. Like I mentioned, these aren't available in the US yet, but I was lucky to be given a pair to review by the folks at Growtac themselves. Looking at them, they look like regular modern day integrated shifters. Very campy-esque to be exact, with the large paddle to go into low gears and a small thumb button to go into harder gears. There's also mention of another like sub shift lever in the manual, but that's not happening on the pair I have. But pretty much that is where the similarities end. Firstly, when you shift the paddle or use the thumb button, there isn't an audible click. It's just smooth lever throw all the way, baby. It's actually strange how there's hardly any haptic feedback. There's no ratchet, nothing. It's eerily quiet. There's the slightest bit of tension that you feel as you work against the spring of the rear derailleur, but that's about it. Things get a little bit odder in the setup. When I first opened up the box and looked at the instructions, I had a minor freak out just because everything was in Japanese. And it wasn't the most obvious thing to set up. So I spent a lot of time with Google Translate, practicing setting up for a few days just so I can get right for this video. Also, big thanks to Eamon from Velo Orange, who gave me a quick run through what's involved with the shifter. When it eventually hits the market here in the US, Velo Orange will be the official distributor. Before we get into the shift quality and all that, I want to give you guys a brief kind of big picture overview of installation. So to install the brake cable, it's relatively simple, I guess. And it goes through the top of the lever, pretty straightforward, but you do have to pass the cable through this bead. That helps it set inside the lever. To attach the levers to a handlebar, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a metal band. You've seen this in almost every other shift lever out there on the market. To install the shift cable is where things get more involved and a little bit more interesting. Firstly, you have to peel back the rubber of the hood completely, kind of working it around the thumb button. Then you have to remove a bottom plate. I think it uses a Phillips head. This then gives you access to the adjustable barrels or pulleys, as they call them in the manuals. One super unique thing about the shifter is that you can change the diameter of the cable pulleys. It comes pre-installed with some pulleys inside, but then you also get a plastic bag, and they look like this. And you actually have to break them off from this middle piece and make sure The sides are flush. They form two hemispheres of the barrel or the pulley that then screw into the rotating body. This is interesting for a couple of reasons. One, you can adjust the amount of pull you need for different derailleurs. They have a graph on which diameter works with what kind of derailleur. So if you're using a mountain bike rear derailleur, you want to use the pulleys that have a larger diameter because it requires more cable pull. But more importantly is that it lets us know a little bit about their future plans. You see, if it was pure friction, why not have the largest barrel / pulley permanently installed? That is kind of the thinking behind the Uno shifter. This is a big barrel and it's meant to pull, modern rear derailleurs, mountain or road. The idea being that you would use the largest diameter so you can pull as much cable as you need to for any derailleur out there and just adjust with technique. Here, they're laying the groundwork for future adjustable index shifting with index plates. None of these are available now, so don't get too excited, but it's an interesting peek into their future. So back to the setup, I swapped out the pre-installed pulley, which I believe is 18 millimeters in diameter, the largest diameter one that they include, since I was going to use it with the Q's rear derailleur. To do that, you have to unscrew each hemisphere at a time, removing one half, installing the new half, then shifting so you get access to the screw of the other half of the pulley that you want to remove and replace. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a little bit involved, but not overly complicated. It does behoove you to have properly sized screwdrivers since you don't want to be stripping these screws. After all that, then you thread the shift cable through the body, through an included noodle that goes under this retaining clip. Then you seat the head into the pulley. You're almost there. You just have to reinstall the bottom plate and then pull the hood over. If you're doing this install yourself, I highly suggest getting all the cables threaded through the shifter before installing it on a bike. With the technical stuff out of the way, what do I think? First off, from an ergonomic standpoint, I absolutely love it. It's small and felt like brake levers of yore before they started jamming hydraulics and electronics inside them. The brake lever has a higher pivot point, kind of similar to what they did with GRX. I can attest that it works great with pawl clampers. The levers are some sort of plastic, not sure what exactly. In terms of use, the big paddle goes into easier gears and the small button goes into harder gears. Like I said, there's a mention of another sub shifter, but on mine, there was kind of a space for it, but nothing there. With the largest pulleys installed and using it with a Q's mountain bike pull rear derailleur, it takes about 2 1/4 sweeps to get all the way through the cassette, going both up and down. Some of the biggest differences, would say traditional friction shifting, is that there's no ratchet sound. It's actually eerily quiet. At first, it's a little unnerving, but then you realize how noisy modern shifters can be with their clicks and their buzzing. It actually feels like if you took a regular index shifter and managed to somehow break all the internals, but it still manages to shift. Also, unlike a regular friction shifter, when you move the lever, it stays in place and gives you kind of some indication of where you are on the cassette. With the Growtacs, after you shift, it resets with the clutch mechanism inside. This is a bit weird at first, since with a friction shifter, you can tell where you are in the cassette and how much throw you've got left, but you lose all that feedback since it resets itself and it's like completely quiet. Trimming is also strange. With friction, you can just go back and forth and fine tune it. And you do that to some extent, but instead you use the big paddle and the small button, which, historically should click, but they don't in the situation. So at first it's just kind of strange. One thing most people probably wonder is, don't you get bad shifts with friction? I've found that not to be the case, especially with modern drivetrains. I know Grant from Riv thinks that 9 is peak friction, but I actually disagree with him at this point. I think the more gears that have been added to drivetrains, friction shifters actually become easier. There is less of a no man's land in between gears to get stuck in between. And the strong springs of modern derailleurs, they sort of snap the chain into the correct gear. It's hard to explain and is counterintuitive And the boomers who, the last time used friction shifters were down tube shifters with like 5 gears won't believe me, but trust me, this is the case. One way to think of it is that it's like that carnival game where you've got a rifle and they put up 6 kind of widely spaced targets. You have a greater chance of missing, but once they put more targets and put them in a closer cluster, you're going to hit something. It seems as if the derailleur just magically finds the gear. You just use the shifter to kind of nudge it gently in one direction or the other. I found on the rear derailleur, I actually had to do very little trimming. I should note I'm using it with a 10-speed cassette. I think this feeling of always finding a gear will also increase, once you get to 11 speed or even 12. I found it pretty easy to shift from both the hoods and the drops. Standing and climbing took a little bit of practice. I was able to control single shifts into the easier gears a little bit easier than going into the harder gears with the thumb button while standing and climbing. Although, again, in time with practice, this is something that can be overcome. This isn't the shifter for those who don't want to work or think or practice a little and just want to push a button. It's a little bit more involved, but I think the payoff is worth it. It's equal parts technology and technique. In terms of shifting in the front, it was a fairly similar experience, although I did find that trimming was a lot more frequent just because, again, you've got 2 gears to choose from instead of like 11 or 10 in the back. I actually think the shifter is a great design for all front derailleurs. All front derailleurs should be friction shifting anyways. What are the pros and cons? Let's talk about the pros first. I think it looks great. It feels great. I miss these more streamlined ergonomics of older brake levers. In comparison, the shifters today just feel so big and bulbous. Another big pro is that it works. Sometimes it feels like magic because it just works so well and so naturally. The gears snap into place, much like other friction shifters I've tried. Another big pro is that it's really, really quiet. You don't realize how much noise a shifter can make until you've tried these. It's dead silent. It does feel a little bit softer to push in. Another big pro is that it generally has a lot of the advantages of running friction, the ability to run whatever cassette and rear derailleur combo you want. You could be running 9-speed cassette one day and then throw in a 12-speed cassette in 5 minutes. And as long as the rear derailleur has the capacity, you don't have to worry about indexing. So you can do 7 to 13 speeds. You can do road or mountain bike derailleurs. So what are the cons? A big one is that the setup is involved and it's not going to be for everyone. If you're going to do it yourself, you have to be careful and move slowly to not lose the small screws or accidentally strip out heads. Another con is that it's going to take some skill to use well. In today's age, we're sold convenience, at the touch of a button and things happen. You're going to have to put a little bit of work into it for it to work really well. Another big con is inconvenient cable changes, especially the shift cable. You saw how tricky it was to set up, and that's with the shifter off. I can't imagine having to change a shift cable in the middle of a tour and trying not to lose all the small bolts and everything. Probably my biggest con would be the question about long-term durability. What is the strength of the plastic? If the bike falls over on its side with a load and it hits the shifter, will the shifter still be intact or will it just explode into shards of plastic pieces? What about all these small set screws? Will they come loose? Will they rattle off? Should I put some thread lock? Also, what's the strength of these plastic cable pulleys? These are the only things that are keeping the shift cable in place. Since the springs of modern derailleurs are a lot stronger, you're fighting a clutch. Will the cable head, eat its way through the pulley? Will it cause it to crack over time? Will there be replacements? I already had one issue when I was setting up the front shifter. It comes pre-installed with a really small diameter pulley. I think it was like 17 millimeters or something. I found when trying to shift the front derailleur, since it was such a tight diameter, the head of the shift cable would jump out and it would get stuck somewhere in the body of the shifter. It took me a while to figure out what was going on, so I had to open everything up and I changed the pulley to a larger diameter just so as the pulley turned around back and forth, there wouldn't be a way for the cable head to jump out of the slot. So for me, I love friction shifters because of three things. One, compatibility, which this does. Two, simplicity. This is like super simple. It's literally a lever that pulls cable. Simplicity is debatable with the Growtac shifters. And the third thing is durability. That's sort of the biggest question mark. There's not a ton to break with something like this. There's literally just one bolt that holds everything together, and this is fairly robust. You could, probably throw this against the wall, it'd still be okay. So I'm not saying it's not durable, I just haven't had enough time to feel comfortable with it. While it's friction now, it's definitely a setup to create a platform for an index system. I think if they were to do a true friction system, they probably would have built it around the largest diameter pulley possible. This probably would have allowed for a predictable side entry for the cable, so it would be less fiddly. But as it stands, they're building a platform for a future system. What Growtac has done here is pretty amazing. It's friction in true brifter form, something even roadies can love, and potentially sometime in the future, it will offer user adjustable indexing. And that's just amazing. There's a lot to love. Again, for me, the biggest question is durability. I've had it on the bike for the last few weeks, mostly day rides on pavement and gravel. So the jury is still out, but it is pretty hopeful. So is it for everyone? I don't think so. I think there's definitely gonna be a big segment of the market that will only want clicky shifting. I also think there's gonna be a segment of people that, who like friction shifters like this, that might be turned off by how involved it is and its potential fragility. Again, this is, pretty hard to break and really simple, but it's definitely not as slick as what Growtac has done. I don't think it will replace all friction shifting, but it will provide a really sleek and sophisticated option for those that, want that kind of shifter. That's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And if you guys are enjoying this series, Peak Mechanical, where we explore all things mechanical shifting, then please consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. That's the best way to do it. Pick up some merch from the store. And as always, keep the supple side down.